Get ready to embark on a journey unlike any other. My guest today, Anne-Marie, is the author of an upcoming travel memoir called Happy Iceland. Her story began with heartbreak, which inspired her to embark on this incredible solo journey across Iceland. Her mission, well, I'm not going to tell you anything about this. You're just going to have to listen. I'm super lucky to have interviewed her. You're super lucky to be listening to such an interesting person tell such a good story. So here we go. Anne-Marie Wells, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm doing great.
So you are an author, a traveler, bit of everything. You're actually the first person to ever reach out to me to ask to be on my podcast. So this has been just such a flattering thing to be able to read your book and then know I'll get to interview you. So you are the author of Happy Iceland, a book
Yeah.
I think you recently released. How long ago was that?
It hasn't been released yet. You got the advanced reader copy, so it's
All right.
still in the process of finding representation.
Right. So could you talk a little bit just about the idea behind this book? Just give us a synopsis and how you came to want to do it.
Sure. So the premise of the book is that for my 30th birthday, I used up my saved up money for a trip to Iceland. I was living in Minneapolis at the time. I was very depressed, going from one dead-end job to the other. Also, being unlucky in love as well, jumping from one relationship to the next. And I knew that something had to give. I needed to get out of the rut that I was in. And I had this long time dream of going to Iceland, and I just kind of spontaneously decided that my 30th birthday was the precipice of a new chapter in my life, and I wanted it to be marked with this trip to Iceland.
Reading Anne-Marie's book, you really got the understanding that Anne-Marie is not somebody who just kind of lets life happen to her. She takes action and does things, throws herself into things. Really appreciate that about her. So when she speaks about her rut that she was in, you'll see that she kind of decided to do what she does best. She just jumped right into something. And that something happened to be this trip through Iceland, which was determined by very strict, or I should say the opposite of strict, a very loose set of rules.
And in this case, I didn't make a single reservation, didn't make a hotel reservation, didn't rent a car or anything like that. I also kind of spontaneously decided that I would travel around the country, and each destination would be determined by an interview. So I would interview a random stranger and ask them about their happiest memories in Iceland. And based on our conversation, I would backpack and hitchhike to go find where their happiest memories took place. And ahead of time, I had no idea where that was going to lead me, if I would end up being in Reykjavik the whole time or if I would be sent all over the country. And I ended up finding a childhood farm, the sports fields where an auto mechanic played sports as a teenager. I found the suburb neighborhood where two young girls played hide and seek together when they were even younger than they were when I interviewed them. And through this process over the course of 5 weeks, I ended up finding 12 different happy places, but then had all of these side quests along the way,
Right.
and met a lot of really cool and interesting people, and knew that I had to write about it. I couldn't just have this experience and then let it go.
Well, it really deserves it. I mean, it really surprised me because I came in not knowing what I was getting into at all. And I think one of the funny things about it is that I have read a few travel stories. But the one thing that was very unique about yours is that if you look at your displacement throughout the island of Iceland, it's the most random fucking thing of all time. Because
Yeah.
at the start of the end of every chapter, not every single one, is like, yeah, so this person I met said, go to this place. And it's like, and then you have a map of it. And you're like, okay, this is where I was, this is where I ended up. And it's completely the other side of Iceland where you just came from. And it's not,
That's right.
and it's
Yeah.
maybe not
I
a
did
pretty
that a
part
lot.
even. Yeah. And you hitchhike the whole way, right?
I hitchhiked the whole way or I walked. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I walked and hitchhiked. And whenever I could get a ride, I took a ride. I didn't have a car of my own. So,
Yeah.
yeah, hitchhiked and backpacked along the way.
Totally. Well, when you were doing this, what did you find to be the most, I guess, testing, challenging?
Definitely the weather. I mean, I went in the end of June. I went at the end of June until the beginning of August. So summertime, right?
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be 24-hour sun,
Yeah.
which it was daylight. I wouldn't have said it was 24-hour sun. It was daylight. It was definitely gray and cloudy a lot. But even for the summer, it was very cold, especially at night. So I didn't travel with a tent. I traveled with just a tarp. I slept in a sleeping bag on a sleeping pad and then rolled myself up in a tarp or pitched my tarp kind of like a tent
Yeah.
over top of me. And I was just freezing cold. I brought thermals, I had a windbreaker, I had wool socks, wool hat, the whole 9 yards, and it wasn't enough.
Well, and I think that's what makes the book so good is there's so many human moments, right? Like obviously the weather's a big part of it, but another thing that I was kind of thinking about was this point where you get off the plane, you meet this airport worker, and you're like, "All right, start of my adventure." And they're just
Uh-huh.
not. They're not really happy to talk to you. Like,
Yeah, yeah. And you would think, I'm
yeah.
cute.
Right.
I have pigtail braids. I
Yeah.
seem not someone who's about to mug them.
Right.
And I have a big smile on my face, like hee
Yeah.
hee, trying to
Yeah.
look as pleasant and delightful as possible. But I think some people were just I don't want to say standoffish, but they were guarded a
Of
little
course.
bit. That they were guarded when I would approach them and say, "Can I can I ask you about your happiest memories?" I mean, I can't say that I wouldn't act the same way. And
Yeah.
so I think people just had a their normal reaction to being approached by a stranger and asked kind of an intimate question, not, "Oh, where is such and such restaurant?" or "Am I on the right street?" or something like that, but
Yeah.
something personal to them. Yeah.
For those of you that heard the previous interview with Kirill, this will probably seem like the exact opposite. This was a very simple way of traveling. Simple in the method of it, not in the action of doing it. But yeah, she would just walk up to random people and say, "Where was your happiest memory?" And then she would travel there. She would get there after hitchhiking, walking, whatever she had to do to get there. And she would ask again, and that's where she would go. So that's why sometimes it might have made people a bit standoffish, but as you'll hear later, sometimes it had quite the opposite effect. So like you didn't omit those parts, and you didn't omit also like after you talk to that airport worker, you go to their location, you hitchhike there, you camp on your way there, you find yourself sleeping in a cave on the side of the road, and then you finally get to the other side of Iceland because this very random person told you to go to these sports fields, and you're like, there's two places with the same name in all of Iceland, I'm in the wrong
Yes.
one.
Yeah,
um,
yeah, yes.
and I thought it
Mm-hmm.
was so cool, just all these like, you don't really read people's mistakes they made traveling, you only read the really cool things that happen. So I just love how much humanness
Well, I
there is
think the
in there.
mistakes are the cool things, right?
Right.
Like that mistake that took me, well, first let's backtrack. I think my map made the mistake though, because this town Fludier, there's really only one, but in my map there showed two. And then
Yeah.
when I showed up to the quote unquote second Fludier, I was very disappointed to
Yeah.
what I was. I don't want to have any spoilers, but I was very disappointed about what I was seeing. However, even though in that moment of frustration of like, why is this even in my map? Uh, I I ended up deciding instead of going back the exact same way that I went, I decided to take the long way around because I didn't know if I would end up seeing that side of the country or not.
Right.
And even though it was a mistake, I ended up meeting all of the people along the way that I did, and um, yeah, I think it's uh, those kinds of errors or failures that end up making the trip even more interesting.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I agree with you in the sense that it's a very human look at my experience.
Well, and by the time you left, I mean, you were so popular. You had so many friends. You were running into people that knew each other.
That's
so,
right. That's
so
right.
it
Well, Iceland
definitely
is a
did a
pretty
lot.
small place, so they have only a population of like 300,000 at the time, and maybe more now, or
Right.
around 300,000, 330 or something like that.
Yeah.
And so it's like the size of Buffalo, New York.
Hmm.
It's not very big as a whole country. So like it's not every day that some solo female traveler is going around finding people's happy places. So word
Right.
kind of got around, and then uh by the end of it people are like, "Oh, you're that woman. Oh, cool." And
Yeah.
it was pretty surreal also when I would meet people who knew each other already. And um yeah, that was wild. That, and actually that
Right.
reminds me of another story that's not in the book, but I'll share with you now. Maybe 3 years after I had gotten back from Iceland, and at that point I had been working on my book, and I was at a writers conference in Wyoming where I used to live. And I was in a writing workshop, and we were all in a circle talking about our projects. We went around one by one about what we were writing. And at the end of the workshop, this woman came up to me. There was probably 20 or 30 people in the room. And she came up to me and she said, I was just in Iceland last week. You have no idea how many people asked me if I knew the American woman who went around finding people's happy places. And I told them there's 300 million people in the United States. No, I don't know this woman. And
Right.
now a week later, I'm in the same room as you.
That's amazing.
And I just started weeping. Like, I just
Yeah, of
started
course.
weeping. I need to get this book out. They're waiting for me. I'm still, I'm still in that process. We can talk about that later, but um, yeah, the process is brutal. The process is brutal, but
Yeah.
I'm still trying.
When you went to Iceland, a lot of the emphasis was on this wacky, like, I'm going to go where I find that people are happy. I'm going to go to these random places. It'll give me an excuse to meet wonderful people and all these things. But you're also dealing with a lot of stuff at that point in time. Like you mentioned earlier, you had been bouncing around the United States, moving from place to place. You'd been through, a few personal things. So, in a way, the Iceland trip was a wonderful story. But when you were writing it, I'm curious how you balanced, writing about an adventure and writing about this self growth that you were experiencing and kind of that process as an author.
Yeah, I think there was some meta processing happening at the same time because even post Iceland, I was still growing. I was still kind of floundering in my
Right.
life. It's not like I came back from Iceland and then bam, I stayed in the same place and I met the love of my life and I lived happily ever after. I got my dream job. That didn't happen.
100%.
So there wasn't, I guess, the hero's arc, or they what do they call it, the hero's journey in writing, where it's like you encountered an obstacle, you surpassed it, you came back changed.
Yeah, and I think that when you are reading any kind of story, or if you're reading, or if you're watching a movie, there is this immediacy that those lessons were learned immediately, or whatever circumstances became different, they made some dramatic change that then changed their whole life and for the better. But of course, that's not how reality works. I did make changes. I did have a different mentality and outlook. I definitely came back changed. It just took a while for those changes to really manifest into I guess more more stable, a more stable lifestyle that brings me, and I cultivate more happiness than I was previously.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. another another kind of thing I think would be great to expand upon a bit is just exploring these personalities that you met. So maybe they weren't all absolutely the most incredible person you've ever met, but they all kind of pitched in to create this beautiful trip. And I think one that stuck out to me personally was this person. Was it Rosie?
Yeah, Rosie. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Right. So Rosie, I guess the introduction I could do to him is he's a fellow that you met. Can't remember exactly how, but when you met him, he offered you a ride, and I don't think you knew exactly how far he would take you. But in the car, you got in his Jeep, and you're like, "Oh my God, warm vehicle! This is so wonderful."
Uh-huh.
So, so the adventure started with you got in his car, and I'm going to read a little excerpt here. The
Okay.
two women didn't have much time for chit chat. After I explored the cafe and its eclectic collections of doodads and what its, we returned to Rosie's Jeep. I go to my bed and breakfast, Rosie said as we fastened our seatbelts. I helped my other friend with her, he thought for a moment, with her small car for cut grass. Sounds good. And from then on, you and Rosie traveled together for a bit there. Do you mind elaborating a bit on your experiences
Yeah.
with him?
He's so wonderful. He was a grandfatherly type. He looked like Kris Kringle, he could be a Santa Claus impersonator,
Right.
and very rosy cheeks and the white hair and the white beard, and jolly fellow. Yeah, he kind of brought me along, but then at the end of the day, I had asked him, and I met him because I was just hitchhiking and he pulled over to pick me up.
Yeah.
And we were having a conversation, but in this broken English, the best that we could. And I don't know
Right.
any Icelandic. So um, I think I was pleasant and smiley and engaged with him, and I engaged with his friends at the cafe when we stopped. And then he's like, "Do you want to come with me to help my friend, or for me to help her fix her car with
Yeah.
or that cut grass?" Like, yeah, I'll go wherever this warm car is going. And I
Yeah,
had
no
asked him
kidding.
if I could camp out in the back of his house, but then when we got to his house, it was gonna rain. Like it
Yeah.
was like on the precipice of having a storm, and he's like, "Do you want to sleep inside?" I was like, "Oh yeah, I do." And he got me a little mattress and I slept on the floor in the living room. I think he just liked to have people around. He had another like a couple of boarders that were staying with him who were
Okay.
renting rooms for him or from him in his house. And so I think he just enjoyed having company, but he was a helper. When I was leaving his house the next day, he told me where the hidden key was. So if I wanted to come back anytime that I could, like, okay, thanks. And I never thought that I would end up using it, but then one day I did, and I did end up using that key and going into his house when he wasn't there. But I left him a note, and it didn't, I ended up staying there another time. It didn't bother him that I did that because he told me where it was. And I went to go visit his sister. He hooked me up with his sister who was over in the the western fjords of the country, and I had to take a ferry to get there even, and she was very nice. So he ended up taking me around to all of these like touristy kind of places, but then also these beautiful places off of the beaten path that were beautiful but weren't touristy destinations. Waterfalls that had no path really to get there. We were bushwhacking to get to them, and these secret places that only locals know. And yeah, it was just so special that he went out of his way for me. He did all
Yeah.
of these things for me, and really for no reason, just out of the kindness of his heart, or he liked having me around for whatever reason. And he really became like a Icelandic uncle to me,
Right.
and kind of became a little bit of a headquarters for me at the by the end of it.
Right. So he's just one of many, but the Icelandic people really seem to be just very one of one. And one of my favorite parts of the it's kind of interwoven into your book, but it's these interactions with people who keep mentioning elves and folklore and all these
Yeah.
Icelandic beliefs that are super neat. And you kind of seem to get pretty invested into them as well. Do you mind speaking on that?
Yes. Icelanders and their elves. It's almost like I was gonna say like fairy godparents. They watch over your home or they watch over
Right.
you. But then unlike fairy godparents, they also will fuck with you if you fuck with them. So like you better not double cross them.
Right.
There are all these beliefs about the historical sites of where elves live. So you'll be traveling along a road, even in the middle of a city, and then suddenly the road will go around this giant boulder. But the reason is because elves live there. So it's not because the boulder couldn't be moved, it's because the elves couldn't
Right.
be moved. So the road had to go around where the elves have historically lived. Um, it is, I mean, it's kind of cute in a
Of
way,
course.
right? Like
Yeah.
it's and even one gentleman I remember that I was traveling with, and I was kind of teasing about the elves and also the trolls. So the trolls too. And he even conceded like the trolls probably aren't real, but the elves, yes, the elves are real. Like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Like they really do believe in them.
Yeah. That's amazing. Well, and there's a passage in your book as well, and it was one of my favorite parts of the whole thing where I can't remember the specifics of it, but they were trying to develop a land that had a mound of rocks. And as all Icelanders know, mounds of rocks, that's a big place for elves to live. So
Hmm.
when they said, okay, we're going to get some big machinery, plow through this, their machines kept magically breaking, and they would come
Yeah.
back, they'd fix them, like fuck, it broke again. So on the third
Yep.
try,
Hmm.
eventually, that it starts to work, and the funding just randomly dries up for the work, and,
Yeah.
and I guess like
So it's, mysteriously.
right. And then like when you came at that point, it was like a monument of sorts. It was like had a plaque on it and stuff. And it was
Yeah,
so cool.
so the road that they just gave up on the idea of building the road
Right.
through
Well,
it. So they
of
built the
course.
road around it instead. Yeah.
Yeah, you kind of have to at a certain point. Right. So one thing that I was really excited to mention, um, it's kind of the obvious backpacker or whatever question. Could you just speak a bit on your experience just walking around there, seeing the sights, what you liked, what you thought was overrated, underrated, your thoughts on the
Yeah,
landscape?
sure. Yeah, I have some interesting insights because I didn't go to a lot of those places that people would go. I have never been to the Blue Lagoon, for example, whereas some
Right.
people say that they've been to Iceland, but the only place they went is the Blue Lagoon.
Yeah.
So I can't speak to that, but I think one of the places that I was most taken was on this hike in a place called, oh my God, like Steslis, or something like that. It was in a area called Lone.
Yeah,
So I
some
can at
sort of
least pronounce that.
sneeze or other.
It was when I was on the quest to find a small pond called Voten.
Yeah.
And when I was on that hike, it was all these different kinds of terrain. And I was walking through eventually this field of just debris, of rock debris, all scree everywhere. And the trail was marked by cairns. And at the end of this scree field, the trail goes down into a ravine. And when I came into view, I'm getting goosebumps remembering it. When I came into view of this canyon,
It's in listening to Anne Marie describe this canyon that makes you realize why she's such a beautiful writer.
I I was screaming into the air. I was so taken with the colors. The colors were iridescent. The whole canyon was sparkling as if it was painted with glitter. It didn't seem like it was real. I had never seen rock that was so shiny and glittery
Yeah.
like this and changing colors every direction that I was looking at it. And I just started screaming into the air. Can anybody else see what I'm seeing? Like, is there anybody else here to witness what I'm witnessing? I was so just awestruck, and why does I tried to take pictures, but I had an iPhone 4 at the time,
Yeah.
and you know compared to what phones are with their cameras now, it was very primitive. But I feel like even if you had the most magnificent camera, you cannot capture the beauty of this canyon in a picture. You have to see it with your own eyes. It was just so breathtaking.
And what parts are overrated, you might ask?
I think one of the places that I was kind of underwhelmed was the geyser called Geysir, just geyser. Um, it was just kind of
It was fun.
when you've lived in Wyoming and you've seen Old Faithful, and even Old Faithful after it explodes, it's just kind of like, okay, well, that was that. I guess we'll go on to the next thing.
Right.
And so to see that, but maybe like 1/10 of the scale, it was
Yeah.
kind of underwhelming, and I
Meh.
had the same kind of reaction. Just kind of like, okay, well, that was that.
Yeah.
Here we go to the next thing.
Right. Well, I think it's interesting reading your book because at the beginning, and maybe this was an editing choice, maybe this was completely subconscious. I think it's probably subconscious. But when you first got off the plane, you're like, I think you described it as newspaper gray, the skies. And you
Yeah.
got out and you're like, fuck, that woman was so beautiful, but she was so mean to me. And I'm walking on this stupid road. Everyone's probably looking at me weird. And at the end, you're like, wow, it's just so lucky to be here and these magical elves and these beautiful landscapes. I mean, it's super cool. It's what makes it what it is. Well, hey, another thing I really loved that we have to touch on is this idea of traveling solo, and maybe
Okay.
the fact that when you're traveling, specifically in your instance, you were hitchhiking, you were with people all the time, but in a lot of ways, it was very much a solo trip. Could you kind of speak
hmm
about not only that, but also how you wrote about that?
Yeah, so I decided to go on my own on purpose. It was very intentional to go alone for my birthday. Um,
Right.
and because I was going there for myself, I was going there specifically for this milestone birthday. I didn't want to have to consult with anybody else about what we were going to do or where we were going to go or anything. I really had this. idea of what I wanted my trip to be. And I didn't want to have to, I don't know, agree with somebody else that yes, we're going to go to this place or take this ride or stay at this
Yeah.
person's house or whatever. I wanted it to be my own trip. In that vein, I did meet a lot of people, but there were times that I felt lonely. That the time when I saw Angel's Canyon, for example, and I was screaming, "Can anybody else see this?" I did wish that I was with somebody else so that I could enjoy it with them and to
Right.
watch their reaction too, watch their reaction of awe, maybe, and have that moment. Or the times when I was freezing cold, like it would have been nice to have somebody to snuggle with
Yeah. No kidding.
to stay warm. Um, yeah, so there were moments of loneliness, and when I was writing this book, which, you know, is an ongoing journey, and even when I read my book now, I mean, I haven't read it in months, but when I was reading it last year for the mentorship that I was in, there are moments when I feel bad for that woman who wrote that book. I felt bad for her,
Yeah.
like it wasn't me. And I think writing about it, there's a little bit of a dissociation that happens too on those um, moments of fear or moments of sorrow, moments of loneliness, that I tackle it more from a writer's perspective rather than a personal perspective. I'm writing it as if I'm writing it about somebody else rather than reliving
Right.
those scary moments or those sad moments. So I think writing about it, there is a little bit of a separation, emotional distance that allowed me um to relive those moments that I didn't necessarily want
Yeah.
to relive.
Well,
Yeah.
and I would imagine that it's hard to you kind of lose perspective on the moments that weren't story worthy when you were like, you know, I'm a little sad. I'm not sad enough that I would write a chapter about it, but not having a great day.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
well, you know, there's a have you heard the expression type 2 fun?
no.
So type 1 fun is when you're doing something and you are having fun right now doing it. And type 2 fun is the fun that you have after you have done something. So you don't like climbing the mountain in the moment, but once you have gotten to the top, then you're having fun and you're
Right.
happy that you actually did it.
Yeah.
So it's like the type 2 fun is delayed gratification
Yeah.
fun. A
Yeah.
lot of writers say that writing is type 2 fun. I don't find that to be true. I love to write, but some writers don't love writing. They love having written. And so for them, it's type 2 fun.
Yeah.
And so I think on my trip, there was a lot of type 2 fun happening, the
Yeah.
situations that I found
Well, you're
myself
proud
in.
of it because why wouldn't you be, you know?
I
Um,
survived it. I survived it
yeah.
all.
Yeah. Type 2 fun's such bullshit though because you tell yourself that you did enjoy it and then you do it again and
That's
again.
right. That's right. It's like you have to convince yourself that you liked it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then you're like, I found myself in this situation again. What the fuck? So I need to hear if you were to go somewhere and you were to meet somebody that had never met you before, and they asked, you know, you're just chatting, you're at a bar, whatever, and you got to where you're like, well, I'm going to tell a story from my experience in Iceland. What's your kind of go-to story? What's your best tale you're most proud of, or you have the most fun telling?
Yeah, you know, it depends on the context, right? So
Yeah.
it depends on the context. But I think the story that I end up telling the most is when I got picked up by an Icelandic auto mechanic and a Swiss tourist at the same time. So the Swiss tourist was in an RV with other Swiss people. The RV had two flat tires, and so he was sent hitchhiking to try to go find a mechanic to help them fix or, you know, switch out the tires or whatever. So when the auto mechanic picked me up, there was this Swiss man who was in the front seat. I speak French from being a foreign exchange student in high school. So the Swiss man was very delighted that I spoke French and he didn't have to speak English, and we kind of spoke this like franglais
Right.
together. And this was an hours long journey. So it wasn't like the Swiss man had to have hitchhiked in. He couldn't have walked this whole way unless he was
Yeah.
walking, a whole day or something.
Right.
So we were in the car together a good long while, and I kind of felt bad because the Icelandic auto mechanic didn't speak any English or French, and so we were
Yeah.
kind of having a conversation and he felt left out. So I was trying to say all of the words that I knew in Icelandic to him. So we were in the northern fjords, and so the road goes through these finger like inlets, and we're going around and the water's right there, and it was sunny on that day. And so I was saying like blue water, wow, in Icelandic.
Yeah.
So it's like vatten blå, wow.
Right.
And then there'd be a seagull, and I would say, oh, seagull,
Yeah.
and he's like, oh, very good,
Right. Right.
and
Pat you on
at
the
one
head a little
point,
bit.
yeah, exactly. At one point, I asked him if he knew Rosie, and he's like, Rosie, and I was like, yeah, and I showed him the picture. He's like, oh, yeah, 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 like he knew him. So he was like delighted by that. I tried to engage with him as much as I could, and so once we got to the Swiss man's RV, they let me out. The Icelandic man, he gave me a chocolate milk out of his trunk. He like, like one of those school lunch
Yeah.
chocolate milks, and he
Yeah.
gave it to me, and he gave me like a hug, and I went on my way. And I was trying to get to this place called Norderfjordur, and so it was very remote road, and looking ahead and looking behind, there were no cars in between. So I was like, I don't
Right.
know how long I'm going to be walking. But 20 minutes later, I had my thumb out, and the first car slowed down right in the middle of the road because there were no other cars, to be in the way or anything. And I said, oh, hi, I'm heading to, and they're like, we know who you are. So they had a whole
Like, shut
car
up,
full
get
of
in the
stuff.
back.
Yeah, they had a whole car full of stuff because they were going to go camping for a long weekend, and they had their tent and like, glamping. So they had all their glamping stuff, not
Right.
camping like how I was camping. So they moved all their stuff so I could get in the car. And so when I did, I said, what do you mean you know who I am? So they said, as they were driving, that this man jumped in the middle of the road with his hands out to stop their car. They saw the RV on the side of the road. They thought that he needed help. So they stopped. It was the Swiss man who said, oh, no, we have help. But I just want you to know that there's a very nice American girl who's hitchhiking. And if you can take her to where she wants to go, you should pick her up. And they're like, oh, okay. But before they could go, the Icelandic auto mechanic came out, and he went up to them and he said in Icelandic now, oh, by the way, there's this nice American girl who's hitchhiking and you should pick her up if you can.
Right.
So they were like, with recommendations like that, we
Yeah.
had to pick you up.
Yeah. No kidding. That's amazing. And quite the celebrity when
Yeah.
you left. That's my favorite part of the whole book is the last 2 pages when you're like, so I went to visit John. I went to visit this person, visit that person. I actually ran into this person, but they also knew that person. So we were kind of like sisters at the time. Um,
Yeah,
Definitely
and
the connections you make.
that kind of I guess, connection happened quite often. And then later, after I went back to the States, an Icelandic journalist contacted me to ask to do an interview with me. And my story, when it came out, was the number two read story in the Icelandic newspaper. And it was only number two because that same week, like some senator or something had been ousted from his post for, some corruption or something. And so that
Right.
was
Yeah.
the number one read story. But I was the number two read story in the
That's
newspaper at
amazing.
the time.
That's amazing.
We often forget when we're reading books that authors, generally speaking, are pretty well trained people that are honed in on their craft. It's not all about the story you're telling, it's about how you're telling it. And everyone knows that, but it's easy to forget when you're reading a book. So for Anne Marie, she'd never written a book before. Now, she's published books, she's found some success. I'm sure she'll find more, but when she had written this, she was unproven. She didn't know how to write. And so this was an interesting aspect, not only the trip, but also kind of crafting this into a final product that's as polished and as easy and as entertaining to read as her book is.
Yeah, I brought a notebook with me, a little tiny notebook that could fit in my pocket. And so I just took notes everywhere that I went. I took notes about what I was seeing and also the people that I was meeting, our conversations. At the end of the day, I would try to rewrite our conversations. If not in the moment,
Right.
I would write it at the end of the day so that I wouldn't forget all of this, what people looked like, what
Yeah.
places looked like. And so when I was on the plane coming back from Iceland, I was reading through my journal and I was just thinking, oh, I have to write this into a book. Oh my God, how do I do that? And the first step was just taking my journal that I had handwritten and typing it up, putting it up on a Google Doc. And then from there, I, fluffed it up, turned it into what I thought was a good story. But it turns out that I didn't know how to write. And so when you're an amateur and you haven't taken any classes, you haven't read any books, when you send it out to 120 literary agents, they're all going to say no because you're making these amateur mistakes you don't even know that you're making. And so I really started from the ground up, asking my friends who I knew were writers, what books did you read that I can read now? What YouTube videos did you watch?
Yeah.
What classes did you take? And I went back to school. I took online classes before pre-pandemic, before that was a thing, and then post-pandemic too. And eventually got my degree in English, and I followed everybody's advice like, oh, it's not getting picked up. Maybe you should get a writing coach. Okay, well, then I got a writing coach. And then later on, I ended up getting a copy editor, proofreader to go through it. She told me things that I couldn't see, like, and I'm now an editor and proofreader. They're the same things that I point out in other people's memoirs
Oh yeah, look
that
at that
they
progression.
know the story. Yeah,
Yeah.
they know the story. I know the story. So I end up filling the gaps of
Right.
what I already know. And I make an assumption that the reader also knows this. So I
Yeah.
needed to have a different person say, I have no idea what this means. What is this in reference to? Or like, you're
Hmm.
telling the story as if you had already mentioned it before, but you never have. So I needed that kind of feedback, and that was very, very helpful
Yeah.
as well. So then, I mean, I told you this is an 8-year process. The most recent, I guess, event that happened is that I was accepted into a writing mentorship with the Association of Writers and Writing Programs. And I was partnered with a woman named Laura Carney who wrote a excellent book called My Father's List. Also, female travel book that was like a quest, not just oh I'm traveling, but she had a quest that she had found her father's bucket list 10 years after he had passed away. So she went on this quest to complete it for him, and different kind of quest but still kind of similar vibe
Right.
of having this set goal and like kind of connecting the dots in that way, and then meeting people along the way and learning lessons about herself. And so
Yeah.
she read my manuscript and loved it, which also very validating. Thank you, thank you. But she helped me to flesh out my epilogue because my epilogue at the time was just it was like not representative of where I am in my life now. I'm
Yeah.
married, I have a baby, and what did Iceland teach me? How am I different still from that experience? And so she helped me flesh out my epilogue, but she has also helped me with getting opportunities and opening doors. So after she helped me fluff up my manuscript a little bit, and she gave me some other pointers in the main text as well, she hand delivered my manuscript to her agent to consider for representation. And so her agent read it and said that it was a beautifully written book, that I was a beautiful writer, but that my social media presence wasn't robust enough and that I didn't have enough of an internet presence for her to be able to sell the book to a publisher. So then it was a no for her.
Wow.
And it was so heartbreaking. I mean, again, I wept because I felt like if I have this kind of connection and this kind of and it's still a no, it's always going to be a no. So to have this kind of first, the validation that it actually is a well-written book, because she could have easily said, like, I don't think that the manuscript is ready or it needs, XYZ elements. No, it is a beautifully written book. I knew it. I knew it was. And but I have this other gap that's missing. And so now this is my new quest, is
Right.
to increase my internet presence.
You're very interesting, excellent book. I really hope that you get enough traction so that you can get published, because I think everyone should be able to read this.
Thank you. Thank you. I have flirted with the idea of self-publishing it, and I was this close to self-publishing, but my mentor told me to hold out just a little bit longer. It's going on almost a decade. I just need to get it out there.
Right. 100%. Well, I really think that anyone that would get the chance to read this would appreciate it. It's not just for travelers.
I appreciate that so much.
Yeah, because I don't think it's just for travelers. I don't think it's just for women. I don't think it's just for 30-year-old solo travelers. I really think it has a lot of really interesting nuggets for anybody in there.
Thank you. Thank you. And, when it does get published, I'll send you a copy in the mail. Signed.
Signed? I was going to say, could you sign it, please?
Yeah, of course.
Well, thanks for coming on. Have a great rest of your night.
Yeah, thanks for the time. I really appreciate it.